There is a story that refuses to disappear. It appears in the oldest written tablets ever found. It appears in sacred texts. It appears in myth. It appears in oral traditions carried across generations by people who had no contact with one another. A flood, not a storm, not a river overflowing its banks. A flood so overwhelming that it marks the end of a world. A flood that destroys cities. A flood that wipes away entire populations. A flood remembered not as weather, but as catastrophe. And that is what makes it difficult to ignore. Because when one culture preserves a story like this, it can be dismissed as legend. When many cultures preserve it, across continents, across languages, across time, it becomes something else. It becomes a pattern. And the deeper question is no longer whether these stories exist. The question is why they are so similar. One of the earliest known flood accounts comes from Mesopotamia, from the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a region often called the cradle of civilization. There in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving literary works, we find the story of Utnapishtim, a man warned in advance that a great flood is coming, a man told to build a vessel, a man instructed to preserve life. The parallels to later flood stories are impossible to miss. In the text, the gods decide to send a flood to destroy humanity. Utnapishtim is warned by the god Ea. He is told to tear down his house and build a boat. He brings aboard his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. Then the storm comes. The description is not subtle. The land is shattered. The storm god thunders. Darkness covers the sky. For 6 days and 7 nights the winds blow and the flood sweeps the land. When the waters finally settle, the boat comes to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim releases birds to test whether the land has re-emerged. That detail alone should stop people in their tracks. Because centuries later, in the Hebrew Bible, we find the story of Noah. Again, humanity is judged. Again, a chosen man is warned. Again, a vessel is built. Again, animals are preserved. Again, the world is covered by water. And again, birds are released to search for dry land. This does not mean the stories are identical. They are not. But they are close enough that historians and textual scholars have spent generations comparing them. The Mesopotamian version is older. The biblical version is more widely known. And between them lies one of the most important questions in ancient history. Were these separate stories shaped by the same memory, or was one inherited, adapted, and preserved from the other? And Mesopotamia and the Hebrew tradition are only the beginning. In ancient Greece, there is the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. According to Greek myth, Zeus decides to destroy a corrupt humanity with a flood. Deucalion, warned in advance, survives by building a chest or vessel with his wife. After the flood waters recede, they repopulate the world. The structure is familiar: judgment, warning, survival, renewal. In India, the pattern appears again. In early Hindu tradition, the figure of Manu is warned by a fish, often identified with the god Vishnu in later tradition, that a flood will come. Manu is instructed to build a boat. When the flood arrives, the fish guides the vessel through the waters. Again, we find the same core elements: warning, preparation, preservation, a destroyed world, a surviving remnant. And these are not just old world stories. Across the Americas, flood traditions appear again and again. Among various indigenous peoples of North America, South America, and Mesoamerica, stories tell of previous ages ending in water. Among the Hopi, there are narratives of earlier worlds destroyed before the present one. Among Maya traditions preserved in later records, cycles of destruction and renewal appear as part of a repeating human story. In the Andes, Spanish chroniclers recorded traditions of earlier peoples destroyed before later civilizations emerged. The details vary, the gods vary, The moral purpose varies, but the structure persists. A former world, a destruction, a surviving memory. And that is where this becomes more than comparative mythology. Because modern geology tells us something important. At the end of the last ice age, the world changed dramatically. Massive ice sheets that had covered large parts of North America and Eurasia began to melt. Sea levels rose, coastlines moved inland. Land that had once been habitable disappeared beneath water. This was not speculation. It is measurable. Over thousands of years, global sea level rose by more than 100 meters. That means entire coastal landscapes where early human populations lived are now underwater. And not all of this change was slow and gentle. There is evidence for periods of accelerated meltwater release, events in which glacial lakes failed, ice dams collapsed, and enormous volumes of water entered river systems and oceans. In North America, features such as the channeled scablands in the Pacific Northwest bear witness to catastrophic flooding on a scale almost impossible to imagine. These were not ordinary floods. These were landscape-altering events. If even a fraction of such experiences entered human memory, if coastlines disappeared within the span of generations, if settlements were swallowed, rivers rerouted, and familiar land lost, then the emergence of flood memory across ancient cultures becomes far less surprising. Not because there was necessarily one single global flood in the literal sense, but because many human communities may have endured catastrophic flooding events that felt world-ending. And that distinction matters, because once an event enters communal memory, it does not remain unchanged. It becomes retold. It becomes symbolic. It absorbs moral lessons. It becomes attached to gods, ancestors, cosmic order, and the fate of humanity. But beneath all of that, the core memory may still remain. Water, destruction, loss, survival, renewal. That is why flood myths matter, not because they prove every detail exactly as written, but because they may preserve something real beneath the layers of religion and story. A memory of instability, a memory of collapse, a memory that the world people depended on could vanish. And if that memory is real, then the implications stretch far beyond myth. It means that some of the oldest stories on Earth may contain fragments of historical experience. Distorted, yes. Symbolized, yes. But not invented from nothing. It would also mean that myth is not the opposite of history. Sometimes myth is what history becomes when the event is too old, too large, and too traumatic to preserve in plain form. And if that is true for flood stories, then what else might ancient people have been trying to remember? What other stories, now dismissed as legend, might preserve echoes of real catastrophe? What else was lost when coastlines vanished? What settlements disappeared beneath rising seas? What knowledge went with them? And how much of the ancient world survives only now, in fragments of story? Because perhaps the real mystery is not why flood myths exist. Perhaps the real mystery is this: how much of human memory is hidden inside the stories we were taught not to take seriously? And if the flood was remembered, what else was too?